الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بشيرا ونذيرا بين يدي الساعة من يطع الله ورسوله فقد رشد واهتدى ومن يعصهما فإنه قد غوى وإنه لا يضر إلا نفسه ولا يضر الله شيئا إن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن خير الأمور عوازمها وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أما بعد. Today I would like us all, including myself, to reflect on a hadith that many of us here have probably heard before. If you've not heard it before, it's no problem, we can still reflect on it, inshallah. This hadith, narrated on the authority of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, pertains to the importance of the intentions behind every one of our actions. It was narrated on the authority of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ. Right, that the value of an action depends on the intentions behind it. This hadith is drawing attention to the fact that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges us, He does not look only at our actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give someone a reward simply because they did a good action. While it is very important that an action is good in order to earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the intention behind each action must also be for His sake in order to earn that reward from Him. When I'm speaking about a good action or a right action, this is defined by the Quran and Sunnah. So we're talking about a good action. This is an action that is in line with the Quran and Sunnah, that is permissible, that we can get reward from. The rest of the hadith, this is a longer hadith than just the beginning part. Often we just hear that beginning part, but the rest of it continues. And after it mentions the value of an action depends on the intention behind it, it states a man will be rewarded only for what he intended. The emigration of one who emigrates for the sake of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is for the sake of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the emigration of one who emigrates for gaining a worldly advantage or for marrying a woman is for what he has emigrated. So as I mentioned, often when we hear this hadith, it's just the first part. When we read the rest of it, we see that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has provided an example for us to understand better what he's discussing here. He provided for us the example of the hijrah, the emigration. He's mentioning that the intention behind moving from one place to another must have been for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for somebody to gain reward out of it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge accordingly based on what the intention behind that good action was. If the hijrah was done with any other intention, so the hadith gives examples. For example, if somebody's going for a worldly gain, they're doing the hijrah to go marry someone, the intention is what they're going there for. That is the intention now. That is different than doing the hijrah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the intention is different in this situation. And one thing to note here is, of course, the example being provided is of a halal action. Right? He's not giving an example of doing a haram action with a good intention. Inshallah, we'll get into that a little bit later in the khutbah. But to be clear, when we're discussing this example of the hijrah, that doesn't mean something wrong is being done. If somebody is emigrating with another intention, they're emigrating with the intention of getting married, that doesn't mean something wrong is necessarily being done by them if they're not doing it for the sake of Allah. But it needs to be understood that in order to get that reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, both the action and the intention both need to be in line with each other. So for example, we talk about fasting for Ramadan. If I go the whole day without eating, but I had no intention to fast, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not reward me for fasting in that situation. You have to have had the intention to fast, and then you fast, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the reward. At the same time, there is, of course, I'm mentioning here that the intentions are not necessarily bad, but there are wrong intentions that can be associated with any actions. The intentions, when I'm saying wrong intentions, I mean intentions that don't fall in line with the Quran and Sunnah. Intentions that are prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not intentions that the actions are prohibited, and the intentions can lead you down that wrong path. And we learn from the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about those that do actions that can lead people closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the intentions are not in line with the actions that are being done. So a hadith Qudsi that describes a certain type of people in this situation. So I'm talking about people who have done a good action, but the intention behind these actions are not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a hadith Qudsi, and it's a little bit longer, so I'll just summarize it. It talks about the first three types of people who will be judged on the Day of Judgment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this narration, the first person who will be judged on the Day of Judgment is somebody who will come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He will tell him that he was a shaheed. He was somebody who was martyred. He was fighting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when he says this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell him that you are lying. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell him, this is the first person being judged on the Day of Judgment. Allah will tell him, you are lying. You did not do this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You did this so people would look at you and people would praise you. And then the narration mentions this person will be dragged into the hellfire. And the next part of the narration mentions the second person who will be judged is a person who learned and studied Islamic knowledge in this world. They recited the Quran and they taught it to others. And this person will go on the Day of Judgment. They will describe this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what they have done. And once again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell this person that you are lying. You did this so other people would look at you. You did this so others would praise you. Your intention was not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this person will be the next one dragged into Jahannam. The third person, three total people mentioned in this hadith. The third person mentioned is someone who is very wealthy and is generous, very generous with their wealth. And they will describe this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they spent their money in places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be pleased with them for spending their money. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell them that they did not do this for His sake. They did this so others would look at them and others would praise them for what they were doing. And that will be the third person dragged into Jahannam on the Day of Judgment. So these are among the first people who will be judged on the Day of Judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about people who were Muslims in this world, who did all these righteous actions, but their intentions behind it were not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their intentions behind it were for someone else's sake, for any other sake other than for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you might have picked up at this point, I'm kind of going through different combinations of actions, whether or not they're in line with the Quran and Sunnah, and the intentions of whether or not they are for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we understood from that first hadith that إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ that when the action is in line with the Quran and Sunnah, and the intention is for the sake of Allah, there is reward in it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the previous example I just said of the first three people on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we understood in that situation that if the actions are in line with the Quran and Sunnah, but the intentions are not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that person will not be rewarded for their actions. And now the third one, which I'm not going to go too detailed into, is if the action is wrong and the intention is wrong. So based on the previous two hadith, we can understand that of course if the action is wrong, the action is haram, the action is prohibited, and the intention is wrong, there is no reward in this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course the intention has to be correct from the first hadith, that إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ that the actions are dependent on the intentions. And we know that the actions have to be correct from the the first hadith as well, because the examples given by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam were all examples of halal actions, right? But that leaves one more combination of these actions and intention. And if brothers could please move up, there's some standing in the back, please make space. Jazakumullah khairan. So the last part we need to discuss still is if someone has the right intentions, but the actions they are doing are incorrect. To make that simpler, somebody is doing prohibited haram actions, but they're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it sounds kind of funny the first time you hear, how can you do a haram action for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? But it is something we need to be very, very careful about. Just to make it clear, and I mentioned this before, this is not an acceptable action in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not acceptable for somebody to do a haram action with good intentions. Right? There's no concept in Islam of ends justifying the means. The ends and the means both have to be correct in every situation. Both have to be, the action has to be halal, and the means and the intentions have to be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever end goal you are trying to reach, you need to make sure those actions are halal as well, regardless of what intentions there are. Often when we hear this term regarding the niyyah, we relate this to the actions of ibadat, right? We relate this to the salah, we relate this to wudu, we relate this to fasting. But the reason I'm bringing up this last example of ones who will do a wrong action with the correct intentions is because we need to extend past looking at the niyyah just within the ibadat or just within the spiritual matters. Any action we are undertaking in any situation, we always need to be confirming that the action that is being done is halal. We always need to be confirming that whatever is being done has a basis in the Quran and Sunnah. The fact that another Muslim might be doing something is never the reason that something becomes permissible. The fact that a khatib standing up here like myself is saying something does not mean that something is correct. Just because a scholar or anybody else says something does not automatically mean what's being said is correct. There always needs to be that basis within the Quran and Sunnah in order to know which is the right action to undertake in any situation. And similarly, there is no basis in taking benefit or harm as a reason for choosing certain actions when doing something with the right intention. Right? So we're being very clear here that whenever there's any action that needs to be taken, the basis always needs to be from the Quran and Sunnah, not just from a single person, not from somebody's mind or what they believe is beneficial, what is harmful. It always has to have that basis there. And we see in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون. Perhaps you hate the thing and it's good for you, and perhaps you love something and it's bad for you. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows while you do not know. Relate this to the situations we're thinking of in the world today. Relate this to anything that goes on in our lives today. Right? So we're extending this past just ibadat, extend this past just salah and fasting and wudu. While these are very important matters, we're not diminishing the importance of these. We extend this to everything that goes on in our lives. We need to apply this principle of making sure everything we do comes from the Quran and Sunnah to every part of our lives. And we can see that even in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he never allowed something that seemed to be beneficial to be the reason he undertook an action. Right? He did not just see something and think, I'm going to make this step because I could potentially use this in the future, even though we're not supposed to do this. Right? So a very clear example, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims, we know in Mecca before the hijrah to Medina, they were being persecuted. They were being oppressed. Not many, but some were even killed. And we see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going around to other tribes, he was going around to leaders in the Arabian Peninsula, and he was asking them to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was asking them to accept him, give him the support, accept him, bring him as their leader. That was one of his main goals as a prophet. He received offers for this power. When he was in Mecca, we're talking about the same Meccan leadership that were the ones who were oppressing him, persecuting, killing other Muslims at that time. They offered him power. They offered him more than power. They offered him wealth. They told him he could marry whatever woman he wanted from Mecca. They said, as long as you stop doing what you're doing, we'll give you this power. And the response from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, by Allah, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, on condition that I abandon this cause being Islam, before Allah has made it victorious, then I will not abandon it. So this is the situation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're being oppressed, they're being persecuted. He's being offered a position of power. He's being offered a position of power. He could be the top person in the society. He did not give up what he was doing for that. He did not say that, this position of power, I see the benefit in it, I could take this now and eventually get to what we need to get to. Because it was a haram action, he did not go about that. He continued living in the conditions they were living in until they were able to move to Medina. This was how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went about it. And as I conclude, I want to reflect on how we can apply that to our own lives today. When we take the Quran and Sunnah as the blueprints guiding any action in every aspect of our lives, whether it's spiritual, whether it's social, whether it's economic, whether it was in the example of Rasulullah right here, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, though we mentioned it was political. In any situation, we go back to the Quran and Sunnah to make sure that our actions are correct in achieving whatever kind of good goal we're trying to achieve. So we're in a business transaction, for example. We have to make sure that whatever is going on in that business transaction is allowed within the bounds of Islam, regardless of what benefit might come from it, regardless of how much money you might make from it. We have to ensure that whatever is within that transaction is allowed. You think of any examples in the world today. There's Muslims all over the world who are being oppressed. How do we stand up for those Muslims? How do we stand up for the Muslims in Palestine? How do we stand up for Masjid al-Aqsa? Do we figure this out ourselves? Do we think about what's the most beneficial? Or, as we mentioned, we go back to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned for us. It's something that we very often hear growing up, or whenever you start learning about Islam. Islam has the solutions for everything, right? Islam has everything answered for us. And this is a true statement. When you talk about the world, in every part of our affairs, every aspect of our lives, Islam has the solutions for us. So we go back to these, right? Whether it was that business transaction, whether it was Palestine, whether it's Kashmir, Burma, the Muslims in Syria, we talk about these situations. We all have a clear goal. We want certain things to happen in these situations. We want justice in these parts of the world for the Muslims. We want, the business transactions to go well. We have to ensure that the path we are taking to get there is in line with Islam, right? Just as when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was seeking that support, he made sure that whatever path he undertook was halal. It resulted in 13 years of oppression in Mecca. That didn't faze it. That didn't faze the Muslims there. They still waited until a halal opportunity was there. Until the opportunity was there to do it the correct way. So we should be making sure that our solutions in every situation are always in mind to ensure that we are gaining that pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we are doing something for His sake. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us all steadfast on His deen and help us purify our intentions. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين أما بعد. يا معشر المسلمين، أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد بعدد من صلى وصام. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد بعدد من قعد وقام. اللهم صل على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى سائر الصحابة والتابعين وعلى عبادك الصالحين. اللهم أيد الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أيد الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا منهم. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم ثبتنا على الإسلام. اللهم ثبتنا على الإسلام. اللهم نور قلوبنا بنور الإيمان. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم، ولذكر الله تعالى أعلى وأولى وأعز وأجل وأتم وأهم وأكبر. وأقيموا الصلاة.